Good morning, everybody. I hope everybody had a good night and came today energized to close out this digital transformation event and then transition into Talent Forward. Again, thank you for coming and taking time out of your busy schedules to be here and share your thoughts and expertise with us. Again, just want to thank our sponsors, without whom this event would not be possible. So a special thanks to the Walmart and Gates Foundations for supporting the work of the T3 Innovation Network and the Chamber Foundation. I know many of you also received support from them, so without them, a lot of the movement would not be able to take place. So we're very appreciative for their generosity and support and trust in all of us. Wanted to quickly go over today's agenda. We only have 3 hours today, so we'll have one networking break in the middle of it all to let you guys stretch your legs, and then we'll come back to kind of close out the day. But we have a lot of great content today, and we hope that maybe we'll all learn something new. So we'll have Amanda Winters from the National Governors Association will come out in a little bit, share some thoughts and reflections from yesterday, as well as share a little bit about the work that the National Governors Association is doing to build a community of practice with states looking to do skills-based hiring and looking to adopt LERs. That will then transition into a panel about action networks and how individuals can engage with different communities of practice. So we have a number of organizations and representatives from those organizations on this panel that all represent different communities of practice. And they're going to share what their communities of practice are centered on, what they're focused on, and how to engage with their work, and how those communities of practice can actually collaborate and work together to create a collective action network. We will then have hear from Peter Beard, who is the newest member of the Chamber Foundation team on the workforce team. He will talk about skill savings accounts, which combines a lot of the LER technology and LER digital transformation tools that we're talking about with financial technology in the fintech space. And we're excited about this concept. We socialized it last year. We put out a report in October of last year on skill savings accounts, and now we're happy to share a little bit more detail with all of you. That will then lead to a networking break, after which we'll hear from Sharon Liu from Jobs for the Future, who will talk about her recent report on digital wallets. And then our closing keynote will be Scott Pulsifer from Western Governors University. He's the president of that university. We will then, you'll have to hear me talk again at the end of the day, a little bit about the next phase of T3, where we're going, what we're doing, and I'd love to have an opportunity to hear from all of you and see if you have any questions or feedback or would like to share updates on the work that you're doing that's critical to the movement. We will then transition to Talent Forward. And if anyone is staying for Talent Forward, we will have lunch. So all those details will be shared at the end of the day. But without further ado, I'd like to welcome Amanda out to talk about, share her thoughts and reflections and set up the panel.
All right, this feels fancier than I am, so forgive me if I don't know how to orient myself on a fun and bouncy stage. So I've been asked to provide you with some reflections from yesterday. I'd love to also hear from some of you as we kick off some, what did you take away from yesterday? If I could have a few shout outs, just like one word. What did you learn yesterday? Collaboration. Progress. Data, okay. Listening. I'm sorry? Innovation. These are great ones. Actually, a lot of those are in my notes. So I feel like we all listened to the same things yesterday, which is good. So I'll do a few big picture reflections, and then we are going to have a panel to kick us off today that's going to talk about what implementation looks like, and also what some of these communities that are coming together to solve problems are looking like too. So I want to start with one of my big pictures, we heard progress. That was definitely one of my feelings from yesterday. I was reflecting back on the last few years of gatherings that we've had It's been a relatively small core group of national organizations that are dealing with some of these challenges, and the conversations have evolved, and that we've seen progress. We're moving forward. It felt sort of, for me, who's not a tech person, a lot of these early conversations were focused on the tech, and I was overwhelmed. I spent the whole time being like, I don't know what you're talking about. If you can't explain it to me, I don't know how I can explain it to other people, how I can explain it to states. And now I think we've progressed to a point where we're starting to have some really coherent messaging around what we're trying to do. But the work has definitely changed. It has evolved. It's more centered on the outcomes rather than the technology, which very early on, this was a tech-led conversation. It was a lot of vendors in the space. It was difficult to navigate, to figure out what are we trying to do. There was a lot of money and time being put towards what were some very cool, innovative tools without sort of the policy conversation to go alongside, to say, what are we trying to do? And I think that's sort of leveled out a lot more. The policy conversation has accelerated. You heard quite a bit of it in the room yesterday, of folks saying, here's what we're focused on doing. We're focused on getting people jobs. We're focused on data mobility. We're focused, these things that are enabled by the tech, but they're not led by the tech, which I think is very exciting. So I was so happy to see that shift in some of the conversations. Also, from the perspective of states, a lot of excitement can be generated by the innovation conversation. So heard the word innovation. So you can get a lot of excitement there, but when you actually think about it, implementation of the innovation is long-term. It's a little bit boring. It focuses on the fundamentals. So we get excited by the innovation, but then when that flips over into implementation, it just takes a bit longer. And then there's lots of collaborations and partnerships that have to be part of the conversation. So a lot of stakeholders have to be engaged. And one of my reflections too, as I was listening to some of the speakers yesterday and listening to some of the states talk about their work and their priorities, I feel like we've been having some of these conversations in some very separate spaces. So education and workforce has been having a conversation around credentialing and skills. So what are sort of the packaging of some of these skills and skill development that need to be developed so that people can be more prepared for an evolving workforce landscape. So education's having their own innovation conversations over here. You have the tech folks that are like, tech can do everything, and blockchain and AI and all these things that I personally say a lot, but do not understand what I'm saying when I say it. So you got a lot of those kind of conversations happening. And then there's employers talking about what they need, what they want. And what I think we're discovering as some of these conversations continue is that we have not necessarily built the bridges between these conversations that need to be happening. So we're seeing progress in these different spaces where we're like, look at all this exciting stuff happening over here, and it's entirely disconnected from what's happening over here. And the group that suffers the most from this disconnection are the learners and workers. We can feel very good about ourselves as policy folks or project-focused people who are seeing advancement in this one section of the conversation. But if we don't better connect those conversations, then we're not going to actually see real outcomes or impact on people, which is the focus. And certainly I heard that from the panels yesterday, like a focus on the human outcomes. What are we doing? What are we changing? What are we going to do differently? And I think the data was shouted out as some of the things heard about yesterday. I think that's really important to the National Governors Association, because once states make these investments and they do some of these innovative things, they have to pretty quickly point to outcomes, or else this stuff's going to fizzle out. It's going to feel like a pilot. It's going to feel like an interesting thing that they did at one agency, and then it'll be like, oh, remember a couple years ago when you tried that thing with a catchy little name and it didn't go anywhere? We didn't build on it. We didn't scale it. So that's one of the challenges at the state level, is to keep the interest up and to keep the excitement up through outcomes. Something concrete we can point to, this helped, this changed, this moved a needle that we were trying to move. And so I think at NGA, we're really focused on like, how do we get, start to point to some of those outcomes? What is the real output from the work that we're doing that we can then sort of use as an acceleration tool? So the National Governors Association, we are not the experts in all of these things, but how I kind of frame it is that we curate the space for states. So we don't have to know all the things, but we have to know all the people who know all the things. And then we bring those people to our events, and they share their expertise. So we set a stage, we set a table for a conversation so that states can better accelerate good policy. And T3 does that. They set the tables. They bring together constituencies that are not necessarily organic for the National Governors Association, but they are critical to state advancement of policy. And so I think that's one of the things I would pull away. Collaboration was thrown out as one of the points here. That's one of the things we have to do in settings like this. We have to collaborate. We have to understand the different perspectives that are being brought to this. And this session that we're going to have here in just a second, this panel, is going to talk about different communities of practice. And that's one thing that was pulled out for me yesterday, is that this ecosystem around this work and around outcomes that matter for students and learners brings together a lot of communities. And there's a lot of different, I have a certain constituency that I work with. It's a unique one, it's a good one, it's a powerful one. We saw some of the state folks up here on the stage yesterday talking about the exciting work that they are doing. We love to see states leading, but not all of this is the state's job. There are lots of other players here. I think our job is to figure out what is the state's role and how can we collaborate with private partners, with nonprofits, with researchers, with experts in order to make this work happen. And how do we sort of find our space there? And I think that's what these communities of practice we're going to talk about today are also doing, figuring out how to connect to other communities in order to really solidify an ecosystem that can help us accelerate some of this work. So I'm really excited to bring together some voices today that from NGA's perspective really fill out a picture. So we have some folks have more of a business-focused perspective, more of an HR perspective, which when you're talking about skills-based hiring and advancement, it quickly becomes an HR conversation. And that is not one that I've lived in my life. That's not one that I fully understand. I live in the education and workforce space. And so an HR conversation is sort of just the nuts and bolts of what the education workforce outcomes look like for a hiring decision. And so that connection's super important, but very specific types of perspectives and needs when it comes to their community of practice. But then also thinking about implementation of some of the technology. What are some of the challenges that are coming up for them? How are they attacking this? But then also just some national views of how are we working together? So I think we'll be able to hear across a nice spectrum of perspectives around what community looks like in a policy space. This one is especially complex because it's sort of lots of different trends woven together, lots of different spaces, technology being a really strong emphasis point, and certainly the digital transformation looks different in different contexts. And we're at different spaces in our different communities. And the ways that we're thinking about sort of the impact of technology and digital transformation within our different communities of practice, but then also how to connect them, how to connect the reality of where we are with our data and our digital tools in states with innovation and excitement and advancement and things that are being built that can do so many cool things if we have our crap together with the fundamentals. So we have to think about that at the same time as we're thinking about what does change look like. So aspirational, but also really pragmatic. And I think we're going to get at that with some of the questions I'm going to ask of this panel today. So I'd like to pause now and bring out my panelists who are going to talk through the perspectives from their communities. And then we're going to hopefully tie it all together and share with you all opportunities to collaborate with these different communities, to learn from them, and hopefully to work with them over the next year or so. So I'll pause there and wait for them to come out. amazing. I kind of feel like a motivational speaker and Britney Spears at the same time with this, and I've been walking around stage, so now I feel weird sitting down. But I'm going to do that so I don't take up the space of the panelists we have here today. So I'm not going to take a lot of time to introduce these panelists. They're going to introduce themselves and frame up where they sit in the work and sort of the goals of some of the work they're doing. So I'm going to go quickly down the line to introduce Madeline and Paige and Clay and Jamie, and I'm going to let them jump in and talk about, quickly I'll give them a framing question. Tell me who you are, your organization, and sort of your perspective and what community you're coming from to engage in the conversation today, and then we'll go back through and dig in a little bit more deeply into their communities. Madeline, you want to kick us off?
Sure. My name is Madeline Ron. I'm the network director at Skills Forward, and Skills Forward is an intermediary that is administering grants to 7 grantees who are implementing end-to-end LAR demonstration projects. And our grantees are anyone from workforce boards and universities, really anyone who's in that position to kind of be the convener and leader of an LAR implementation project. We know that the ecosystem involves credentialing organizations and employers and tech vendors, and so our grantees are the folks who are able to bring all those key stakeholders together and are in a position to set a vision for a project. And they kind of bring their teams together as needed to implement these end-to-end LAR demonstrations over the course of 18 months to 2 years. So we're just over a year in now, and we're really excited to see the progress that's been made so far.
Awesome. Well, I'm Paige Bongiorno. I'm the director of the STARS Public Sector Hub for Opportunity at Work. For those of you who are not familiar with Opportunity at Work, we're a nonprofit social enterprise. We are on a mission to rewire the labor market so all Americans can work, learn, and earn to their full potential. We are working to advance economic opportunities for a population of 70 million workers across the United States that we call STARS, which are individuals skilled through alternative routes other than a bachelor's degree. Currently, we work with corporate, public sector, and philanthropic partners to support our work. I'm specifically supporting the public sector side of our work. And we are kind of in the middle of 2 major communities at this moment. Back in May, we launched the Public Sector Hub, and then just this past October, we launched our Transformers in the Public Sector cohort.
Awesome. Clay?
Hey everyone, my name is Clay Lord, and I'm the Senior Program Director at SHRM Foundation. SHRM Foundation is the 501c3 nonprofit arm of SHRM, which is one of the largest membership organizations in the world and the largest for HR professionals. We have 340,000 employer members all across the world that serve 362 million people every day. My work at SHRM Foundation is centered on our mission, which is to equip and empower HR professionals and employers in general as forces for social good. And one of the ways that we do that is through a significant amount of energy and work in the Skills First space and in the broader widening pathways to work space. And so in addition to our members, which constitute one potential community of practice, we also work with a cohort of ecosystem organizations, including actually everyone up on this stage, as well as Education Design Lab, who I see, hello, to do ecosystem level, sort of enterprise level solutioning so that small and mid-sized businesses can participate in the Skills First future.
Awesome. Good morning. My name is Jamie Francis. I am Vice President here at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, the nonprofit affiliate of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. I oversee our Talent Pipeline Management Initiative and support the Talent Pipeline Management National Learning Network, which is a phenomenal community of practice of practitioners who are out there trying to help engage employers and education and training providers partnerships differently so that we can really focus on what our industry's needs, how can we provide tools and strategies so that educators and employers can work more effectively together in order to create better wins for learners and workers.
Yeah, so Jamie, I'm going to stick with you, and then we'll come back this way. We're just going to change it up, so be ready for anything and all these questions. What do you think is the value of structuring some of these learning opportunities in a community of practice. So for your constituency specifically, and if you want to talk a bit more about them and sort of the dynamics of working with these groups, but also like what happens in those communities of practice and how are you bringing together some of that learning to accelerate the overall policy priority?
Yeah, absolutely. So Talent Pipeline Management National Learning Network is made up of a lot of business-facing organizations, so local and state chambers of commerce, economic development organizations, state workforce agencies, and increasingly workforce boards, as well as education and training providers. But a lot of the folks that leverage TPM methodologies fall into that business-facing organization category, and that they're trying to really think about how can we influence and motivate behavior change on behalf of employers in order to see, again, better wins for learners and workers. So the value of a community of practice is that while we all like to treat each community as the unique special snowflake that it is, a lot of us are wrestling with very common challenges when it comes to talent. We don't have enough people. We have a lot of open jobs. We're having difficulty retaining our talent. We're trying to expand talent pipelines so that there's better representation of our community members in our workforce. And so when we think about the common challenges that are experiencing, not to say that every solution is going to be a carbon copy of one another, but there's great value in being able to lift up here are things that worked really, really well for our community, and to dissect the process to try to get very granular and actionable about here's the methodology that we used in order to achieve this result. Maybe with some tweaks here and there, it could also be applied to your community. And so just the willingness of folks to share what worked well, but oftentimes, even more importantly, what didn't work well? What were the challenges that you experienced? How did you overcome those challenges? Maybe that's where policy does come into play, but really understanding the process, the nuances of the process that a community or an organization went through in order to stand up these really impressive talent solutions has been transformational. And we're so lucky in that our National Learning Network of colleagues have been very generous with those learning lessons so that we can better understand, well, what was the goal that you were working towards, and then walk us through step by step what ended up happening, the good, the bad, the ugly. Let's make sure that we understand so that other communities that might want to repeat similar solutions have the playbook so that they can really follow it to a T and get those shared wins that we're all looking for.
Yeah, I think you're bringing around a great point. I think certainly in some of our learning communities, it's a safe space to share what didn't work too. Because publicly you don't want to say, oh, that failed. But to your peers, you can just be a little bit more open and say, this is what we tried, this is what didn't work, but this is what does work. And I think that feeling of camaraderie and you know, we've been through the same things in some of these communities certainly makes a huge difference. Clay, would love to hear from your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Jamie said is really crucial. This idea of being in community in various ways, de-risking what might feel possible or might feel impossible if you were doing it on your own. You know, we have this sort of broad spectrum of members that participate in different sort of what I would say is relatively shallow communities of practice where they're engaged with each other in message boards and things like that. SHRM Foundation also has pilot cohorts that we put together of employers and other partners. Actually, in Arkansas, we're doing some work right now that links employers, workforce boards, education institutions, chambers of commerce, and local government together to have a conversation about how to sort of transform towards a skills-first future at scale. And what we find in those circumstances is that the community of practice concept addresses all three of the major barriers that we see as keeping employers from sort of progressing towards these practices, which 90% of them agree is a good idea, but only about 15% of them say they can do. And those are sort of not understanding the return on investment because they can't see it happening in other partnerships, not being able to understand how to trust the quality of what's being offered to them in terms of the vendors and credentials and tools that are on the market, and instead being able to interact with the community of practice who can say, I used this thing and it worked, or I used this thing and you should absolutely avoid it, is really crucial to them. And then the third one is just generally this idea that people don't do new things if they're the only ones doing the new thing, at least in a professional context, because they run a more significant risk of being called out if that new thing doesn't work. So communities of practice create this sort of very crucial stage in terms of broad-scale adoption of change, whether it has to do with skills work or whether it has to do with mental health adoption or anything like that.
Yeah, the safety in numbers sort of approach, certainly we've seen that in our work as well, but the space to explore. And that's kind of a luxury. So I think organizations like ours, City of Terre, we're trying to make that happen for them, give them the space to try some things.
Yep.
Yeah, makes sense. So Paige, you guys are working nationally. Talk across that sort of like national scope. What do your communities look like, and what do you see the value of them engaging together?
Yeah, so we have 2 communities running right now. Back in May, we launched the Public Sector Hub for Opportunity at Work. And really, the idea behind that was we talked to hundreds of government leaders across all different types of government levels, local, state, federal, and all of them wanted a place where they could find resources, where they can get technical assistance, and where they can work on buy-in and that change in their culture across implementing skills-first practices. So that's ultimately where the hub came from. Currently, we have 150 members on our public sector hub, and that number grows every day. And on our public sector hub, we offer resources. We've done 7 webinars with at least 50 participants at every webinar. Many of those participants are the same, so people are attending multiple of those webinars we're offering. All the topics are around subjects that we've heard are things they need help with, hot topics of that time period, trying to provide them the resources and tools to be successful in their skills first implementation. We also couldn't have done this without partners. We have partnered with 18 different nonprofit organizations on our public sector hub. Again, that number continues to grow. Many of those partners include, NGA, the Chamber Foundation, Partnership for Public Service, and they are helping us to continually grow our resources and be able to help the public sector through a lot of their workforce issues. I think the importance of the hub particularly is people are looking for a place to be able to get help and then to also build community. Really, that's ultimately kind of what a lot of our stuff has come down to, is how do we build that community, especially around public sector employment, because a lot of them are working on the same things. There is some unique individuality from state to state, but a lot of them have so many similarities that they could be sharing resources and tools with each other. The other community that we've been putting together is, in October, we launched a Transformers in the Public Sector cohort. It's 6 states. We have Colorado, Arizona, Utah, Louisiana. I gotta think of all the rest. Colorado, Utah, Arizona, Louisiana, California, and Connecticut. There we go. I had to think about all those. We have 6 states participating. All of them have some sort of legislation or EO in place, moving them to skills first practices within their state government. And the goal of this is to help provide them technical assistance and support as they make those transitions to skills first practices, and ultimately to come out of that with additional resources that we can be sharing widely with lots of other people. And the biggest thing we've seen from this cohort, again, is around building community. A majority, well, all of the states have indicated that one of the reasons they wanted to join the cohort was to be able to work together. That's what they wanted, to collaborate, to talk with each other, to share resources. And we have actually seen evidence of that happening through our cohort. We had our cohort states come into Washington, D.C. a few weeks ago for an in-person convening. And we heard conversations about that. Utah and Louisiana had been meeting with each other independently outside of the cohort and sharing and talking about common problems they're having and working through things together. And then California was like, hey, we want in on that too. So it's been really exciting, and putting together communities of practice is really important because people want that collaboration, and with collaboration it helps prevents any duplicity of work that we're seeing.
Yeah, definitely. I think a couple of things to pull out from what you said. First of all, it's a very bipartisan space right now, which I love being in a bipartisan space right now. Yeah. With everything changing, it's great to be in a space where that's not really a factor. We're really seeing implementation focused on the people who are getting the work done. Yeah. Does not matter sort of the political environment around them. So it's an exciting place to be. But then also some of the things you were mentioning about being just sort of responsive as a community practice. Because I think we can come into it as national organizations thinking this is what they're going to want to know, this is what they're going to want to learn, and then we get a little bit down the road and we're like, oh, okay, that's not the case anymore, or we're looking at it fully from their perspective, and so we need to make some shifts. So I think that responsiveness and the resiliency of the national organizations to respond to what they're hearing from their communities, and to sort of shift along with them, to be alongside. So, so Madeline, you have the most specific cohort and community on this stage. So I'd love for you to talk through, you guys are dealing with very specific types of challenges when you're providing technical assistance or having these community conversations. How is that looking for you in sort of an implementation-focused project? What does community feel like there?
Yeah, when it comes to implementing learning and employment records, I often joke that we've been talking about learning and employment records like they're a real thing for years, and they really are just now becoming a real thing. And it's not just our grantees who are doing that, but our grantees are definitely some of the first to be implementing learning and employment records in like a true end-to-end way. And so it has been so valuable to be in that novel space with folks who are doing this work together and who have the same objectives. And what you were saying about making sure that it's okay to share the things that aren't working has been really, really valuable. And as a leader of the community practice, like wanting to be sensitive about making sure that we, don't kind of broadcast that while still being able to share those learnings. So that's something that we're really trying to balance at Skills Forward, is like, how do we kind of take the things that we have learned about what works and what doesn't work without saying like, this strategy didn't work, this was a failure, whatever. Just really being conscious about that framing, especially knowing how early on we are, because another thing that we found is some of these things just take longer than we were expecting them to, and so we don't want to rule things out from the get-go, but we're starting to learn, kind of get a sense of what those, kind of the difference between those things that work in the short run versus the long run. And the other thing that's been really important as far as the community practice goes in this really novel space is having some standards and kind of expectations that were set from the beginning that grantees are expected to meet, and that's especially important for something like learning employment records, which in order to really be scalable need to be interoperable and kind of adhere to some best practices so that as we start to build out this environment, it is something that's not just being built in silos. And so the community of practice really allows that sort of collaboration between teams, even if there's not that integration right now in the short term. We're building in that way, being mindful of wanting to contribute to a broader ecosystem and really set the foundation for that.
Can I ask you a quick follow-up question?
Yeah.
So the theme here is digital transformation. Mm-hmm. Certainly learning and employment records is a digital transformation. And an important part of accelerating that work is working with vendors who are going to help you do some of this stuff.
Yep.
So not naming any names, but some big picture takeaways about how a group like vendors and tech vendors, some might be startups, how are they integrated in or included in some of the community conversations, and what are some of the guardrails that you might have put up?
That's a great question. So we did, many people in this room contributed to the principles, rights, and responsibilities that we set out from the beginning of Skills Forward, which all grantees are expected to meet by the end of the grant period. And a lot of those are sort of technical requirements. And so having those initial guardrails from the beginning of the project has been really helpful in helping grantees to assess, whether a vendor is able to meet these requirements that were kind of set out. With that said, our grantees, for the most part, are not tech experts, and so it has been interesting to see, and we have learned a lot in terms of like what types of support folks need in order to actually set expectations with the vendors that they're working with in terms of upholding these requirements for interoperability, and also just getting realistic expectations from vendors about what they are actually able to do, because all of this is new. Vendors, for the most part, are building these things from the ground up, and the reality is that things take time, timelines get disrupted, and so again, and that's kind of one of the things I was talking about in terms of, okay, maybe this doesn't work now, but that doesn't mean that we should completely write it off, because when you're building something from the ground up, it can take longer than expected, and just because it is taking longer doesn't mean that it's not necessarily going to be even better in the long run than what was developed in the short term. So anyway, that just to say, it's been really valuable for our grantees to be able to share with each other strategies that they're using to uphold expectations with vendors, and I think it does help to have that kind of community expectation to set from the beginning of the standards that we are expecting our grantees to be able to meet in collaboration with their vendors.
Yeah. Clay, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to, one of the things that I think is really interesting when you talk about communities of practice, so we're really preoccupied with scale. We believe that in order for any movement to succeed, it has to be able to scale, and it has to scale to organizations of all sizes and shapes and sectors, which in the space that we're all talking about is quite difficult to think about. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, communities of practice are often viewed as sort of the opposite of scale, because they're like hermetized communities that are quite expensive in some cases to run and use and whatever. But I think it's actually really important to recognize something that Madeline is talking about, which is that if you've got a community of practice where they can work out the kinks on the thing, and they can do it in collaboration with each other, and they can pull on the appropriate partners in sort of like a safe space, then it creates the better opportunity for scale down the road. Because one of the things that we have really been worried about in this skills first effort is if we roll out with something that doesn't work, that is the one chance we'll get for years until, to like make it right. Because our data says that 40% of HR professionals are not the final decision maker on the technologies that they get to use, and about 50% of them don't actually want to be that decision maker, so that sort of works out, right? But it means that there's this moment where the technology has to be as easy or easier, as cheap or cheaper, or it won't get integrated into the standard operating practices of most organizations. And so being able to do the type of work that's happening in communities of practice that are sort of in those hermetic seals is actually really crucial.
Yeah. Jamie, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, no, it just makes me think about always coming back to the problem that we're trying to solve for, and making sure that the North Star is, okay, what is the problem that community of practice is trying to solve for? Because what can happen sometimes, especially as we're thinking about digital tools, is making sure that we're making their lives easier, right? How is you adopting this particular tool or thinking about hiring from a skills first perspective ultimately going to make your world easier and more effective? And always coming back to that as we're trying to engage our communities of practice, or when things don't work out the first time, is making sure that we're leading back to, what brought us here in the first place? Let's recenter, let's reorient ourselves. Yes, maybe we've taken a different turn here or there, but let's go back to that problem that we've been trying to solve in the first place. Here's how our process and this journey that we've created for ourselves is going to result in more return on investment for you, less burden in terms of the process that you've been using in the past. So how can we always come back to that? Because I think that can help keep a community of practice engaged in a way that leads us to making some change.
Yeah, definitely. And Paige, I know you're working with public sector, which has some archaic systems sometimes to work with, and sometimes has a mandate without money attached to it to make some of these shifts. So the ROI of impact is hugely necessary.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about sort of in your community, the digital integration, the thinking about the platforms, what is that looking like for the public sector conversations?
Yeah, so Yeah, the public sector, as a person who came from public sector employment, they're dealing usually with a lot of archaic systems, and that can be really difficult. One of the hot topics we always talk about is data. Data is hard to get, and it can be hard to get out of old systems. And so a lot of these conversations we're having with our cohort states and other public sector partners is how do we, as Opportunity at Work and the community of practice that we're building, advocate for our cohort participants to their vendors as here's what we're hearing they need built into their HRIS systems, and how can you integrate that into the platforms that you're providing them with? Those are some of the conversations we've started to have. We also have a tool called StarSite, which provides a lot of data specifically around stars within each of the states or within each of the communities. It gets down to pretty granular data. So we've been using that to support some of their data needs as well. But really it's, again, going back to listening to what their needs are and then helping be able to advocate for themselves and also be an advocate for them to whoever they're working with on their digital tools.
Nice.
Just want to put in a plug for StarSite. If you haven't taken a look at StarSite, I mean, everything Opportunity at Work does is like beautifully designed. It's like very pretty,
Well, thank you.
but it is also incredibly deep. So if you haven't had a chance to look at it yet, I'd encourage you to.
Great. So Jamie, I'm going to jump over to you. I want folks to get sort of a feel for what some of the challenges and opportunities are from each of these communities of practice, because we're all sort of tackling a big problem from different spaces. So from your communities of practice, what would you say is the biggest challenge and what's the biggest opportunity? So give us the sort of the big problem and then give us the progress or the excitement.
Yeah, absolutely. So for a lot of the partners that we're working with, the business-facing organizations, sustaining employer engagement, I think, is probably a challenge that all of us have dealt with at one time or another, and making sure that they are a part of the solution from the very beginning, and really starting with that employer group we call them the hungry, the ready and the willing. So going to that group, the folks that are going to be innovative, they're going to be willing to try something different from maybe what they've done before. They're excited about collaborating with one another. So maintaining that excitement amongst a group of employers, because they, like all of us in the room, are stretched very thin. They're pulled in so many different directions. So how can we keep them really engaged and focused is both a challenge and, of course, an opportunity. To Paige's point, like, there's no shortage of data. There's a lot of information out there. So just trying to figure out what is the data that's going to really help us create change that results in that positive return on investment, but also that shared value for all partners that make up this ecosystem. It's just making sense of that information and making sure that we are using the very best primary labor market information that we can, so that we don't start to create solutions that are actually not going to target back to that original problem that, again, brought us together in the first place. Again, both a challenge and an opportunity. When it comes to the digital transformation component of this, I think there's a lot of excitement of how can we leverage these tools that exist, how can we leverage AI technologies to improve our outcomes, to make our lives a little bit easier, a little less burdensome. But there's, quite frankly, just a lot out there to make sense of. And to Madeline's point, like, while yes, we've been talking about a lot of these things for many years in certain parts of the ecosystem, other parts of the ecosystem have not. It still feels very brand new. It feels intimidating. It feels like maybe I'll start to use, ChatGPT or Claude or other tools to this degree, that degree. But when it comes to truly creating systemic change, leveraging these technologies, I think that still feels very heavy for a lot of folks. They don't necessarily know the on-ramp, and to figure out, like, how is that going to connect to that employer engagement piece that I touched on in the front. When it comes to opportunity, however, I think for those that have started to dip their toe in the water and to at least pilot, whether that's through an organized community of practice or just because of other less formalized networks that they're a part of, I think they're starting to see where there could be a way for it to make their lives a little bit easier. But to the point that was made earlier too, if it doesn't work the first time around, making sure that they're willing to continue down the path for a little bit longer and giving things another try can also be tough.
Yeah, and I think you bring out a really good point in your comments of what data matters to your constituents, because there is a lot of data out there. There's a lot of data we could use to communicate some of these things, but what's going to actually move it forward for your constituents? And that could be different for each of the groups up here on the stage. Thinking about, how do I communicate this? But then also, how do I make sure it doesn't lose momentum by focusing on the things that matter to them? So I'm going to bop around a little bit. Paige, I'm going to come to you next.
Okay.
So I'd love for you to talk about sort of the biggest challenge that you're tackling with your community of practice. And then what's the biggest opportunity? What's creating the excitement that keeps everybody moving along?
Yeah, so I think the biggest challenge that we have been facing is, specifically with skills first practices, is just the how. How do we do this? How do we implement? How do we change policy? How do we talk to legislators? How do we talk to our, director of human resources? How do we train our hiring managers to, use assessments for skills when they're interviewing people? We're starting from a lot of ground zero with this, of just this is not necessarily new, but it is now heavily being talked about and integrated in both the public and private sector. So I think that's the biggest challenge we're facing, is just people don't know how to move forward. But also, I do feel that presents also our biggest opportunity of, we now have people who, not only are just doing it because their governor is telling them to. People are excited about it and eager and wanting to implement these changes. And so that presents us the opportunity to help them and to create these partnerships with other entities to be able to reach them and provide them more resources. And ultimately, I feel like the partnerships we're all creating together makes us so much stronger to be able to create these communities and create a network of resources available to them that can reach so many people.
So they're not just doing it because their governor told them?
No, they're not just doing it because their governor told them to.
Okay. All right, Clay, let's hit you with the same question.
Yeah, it's interesting. So 2.5 years ago, we were just at the beginning of starting what now is the Center for a Skills First Future, and I had a conversation with Jason Tisco, who you all I'm sure know. It was one of the first conversations I ever had with him, and in usual Jason fashion, he sort of cut right to the chase, and he said, if you're trying to pull together a coalition, you can never forget the WIFM. And I think the WIFM is the what's in it for me. And I think in communities of practice, it's actually really challenging sometimes to match the WIFM with the amount of time and energy that they have to give you for any specific community of practice. And so we have spent a lot of energy in our pilots and in the coalition we put together for Skills First Future, and in the big broad coalitions that SHRM has, looking at that value proposition from a very sort of pragmatic, sort of what's in it for me aspect. And sometimes what's in it for me is money. Sometimes what's in it for me is kind of clout that's going to come from it. Sometimes what's in it for me is helping them understand that if they do this extra effort and they make this adoption happen, it'll have these sort of short, mid, and long-term benefits for them. That is a constant dance, right? It's something you have to do constantly as you are navigating or running a community of practice. Where I see the benefit of it, which I think is actually really, really crucial, is in that conversation about scale. Because eventually, in most cases, you're going to want to move outside of that community of practice to make the change that you're trying to see in that community of practice happen more broadly. And if you haven't had the exercise of what's in it for me at a small scale, you are definitely not going to succeed at the what's in it for me at the big scale. And so as we, for example, we did a pilot in Georgia that was looking at a very small group of employers, like 30 employers. We learned a ton about what was necessary for them to succeed, and also what they needed to see as the benefit on the other side for themselves, for the people they were talking to as their decision makers, who were going to give them the money or not, allow them the time or not. That is directly informing our next phase pilots, where we're jumping from, let's say, 30 employers to, let's say, 200 employers, which is still not a ton, but is a ton more work if you haven't thought about those conversations about what's in it for me that need to be set up so that they can have an answer when their CEO says, okay, so what's in it for us? or when the chief financial officer is saying, so you want $50,000? What's in it for us? And not having those answers sets you up for failure. So.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. First of all, WIFM sounds like something from Harry Potter, but don't forget it now. You'll never forget it now. But also, what's the value proposition, for anybody that you're bringing to the table? Why do they care? Why do they care about this? Why should they care about it?
Yep.
Important to keep centered in this conversation. So you, Madeline, have, again, the most focused sort of cohort or community. You guys are dealing with very specific types of challenges and are seeing very different types of opportunities. So what does that look like for an implementation project?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it is similar to what everyone else has said, especially when it comes to that, understanding what the value propositions are to actually get people to use this. I talked about, some of the challenges with implementing new technology from a tech perspective, and that's certainly something that we've been dealing with, but that feels like a more concrete problem to solve, whereas when we're thinking about how do you actually initiate that behavior change that's required to make this technology worth anything, that's much harder. And our grantees have been learning, they're all working with very different populations and with different use cases, which has been really valuable to understand which messages resonate with which populations in which contexts, and we're just learning so much about the many different ways to approach this work, and what resonates and what doesn't with folks. And I think the biggest thing that we've learned is just the need to be flexible to change your use case to be more responsive to what your users actually want and need. And just realistically, where we're at now, we are at the point where, this technology, for the most part, is not going to be immediately cheaper and easier for folks to adopt. And so at this point, we're connecting most with the folks who are excited to be at the forefront of change, which does feel really exciting because we're connecting with those who do understand the long-term value proposition and who want to be a part of that movement. And so I'd say the opportunity for us and for our grantees being at kind of the forefront of implementing completely kind of new way of doing things is that we have the opportunity to really make those value propositions and make our use cases such that they resonate with those who stand to benefit the most from this work. And so we are able to make sure that that shift is happening in a way that reflects our values and priorities and our grantees' values and priorities. We know that technology is coming for everything, and so kind of being able to be a part of that process rather than just having it happen to us is a huge opportunity. It just takes being a little flexible and open-minded about we kind of know the problems that we want to solve, but not being too rigid about how we do that necessarily, and especially understanding how we might need to change our messaging to reach different populations.
So we're getting close to the end of our panel time. T3 is essentially a community of communities, bringing together lots of these different groups that are having these integrated and connected conversations, but also hearing from different perspectives. So I think what's valuable for the folks in the room is not only to hear from your perspectives today, but also to figure out how they can continue learning from you and maybe engage with you as your work continues. So I want to go down, I'm going to stick with you first, and then we're going to go down the line here. If we have time for a question or two, we can totally do that. But I do think what I want people to take away is knowing what you're going to be doing, how they might be able to engage, if you have stuff coming out, if you have meetings, what can they do to connect with you and continue learning from you in this community of communities? Madeline?
Yes. So Skills Forward has, first of all, we've kind of created a couple of sub-communities within the Skills Forward communities, knowing our grantees obviously are the ones who we're working with on a day-to-day basis, but knowing that there's so many other people doing this work, we have what we call our Action Network, which is a less formal gathering of folks who are implementing end-to-end LAR demonstrations that meet semi-regularly. If you want to be a part of that, feel free to reach out to me. We also have a community of vendors, most of which are vendors for our grantee projects, but some are just in the broader ecosystem, and it's actually been very cool to see how much vendors want to learn from each other and actually like share what they are learning in a really collaborative way. So if that is of interest to you, also feel free to reach out. And then we're definitely, especially now that we're kind of, have a good chunk of work underway with our grantees, we're starting to think about how we can communicate those lessons learned. We'll have several resources coming out over the next several months, so stay tuned for that. And if you want to get on our newsletter, you can also reach out to me, and I'll make sure that we get you that, which will give you all things that Skills Forward that we're putting out. But definitely within the next 6 months, we want to be able to start to really share what we have learned through this process and think about how we can support the broader community with those lessons.
There are so many ways you can engage with Opportunity at Work. One, sign up for the Public Sector Hub. You can find it on the Opportunity at Work website. You can get signed up for our newsletter, see what webinars we're going to be hosting coming up. You can look at all the resources we have. You can go visit STAR site. Our LinkedIn is very active. We share a lot of what we're doing on LinkedIn, but also we share a lot of what our partners are doing on LinkedIn. So it's another good way to engage not only with us, but with our partners. We also have a podcast that we recently launched called Paperless Pathways that are all about STARS and their stories and sharing about how you can support STARS in your work that you're doing. So I encourage you to go listen to that. I will also shamelessly plug TPM for the Chamber Foundation. I am a TPM program graduate, and it is a wonderful program, so I highly recommend checking them out. And then the last thing I just wanted to leave you with, because I don't feel like people hear this often enough, is thank you for the work that you're doing. As someone who came from the flip side of the communities of practice, I came from the state of Idaho. I participated in NGA's, one of NGA's community of practices, one of their cohorts. I met Opportunity at Work through them. As someone who is also a STAR, the work that you're doing matters a lot, and the fact that you're here and invested in it is super meaningful and wonderful. So thank you for everything that you do as well.
You're here.
And I think national organizations should go poach the state people who are doing this.
Right.
And then hire them into their team.
That's right.
And flip it around. Yeah. Clay, go ahead.
SHRM and SHRM Foundation also have lots of different ways to connect, but I'm going to focus in on one, which is that in collaboration with these folks on stage and Education Design Lab, as well as some other partners, including Grads of Life and CBEN and others, we are launching something called the Center for a Skills First Future. It'll soft launch in May and hard launch in June, but right now you can go to skillsfirstfuture.org and pop your email in there, and we will let you know when things come online. It's going to include a library of resources with about 500 different employer-oriented resources on how to do skills first practices that's entirely searchable, 200 case studies and employer examples, a vendor database of 300 skills-related vendors that HR professionals and others can put star ratings next to in order to communicate with each other about what's working and what's not, and a 16-hour skills first credential that people can take in order to standardize their knowledge about skills first practices and get a credential at the end of it that they can wave in front of their boss's face and say, I do know what I'm talking about, which we find is one of the big barriers to making these things happen. So skillsfirstfuture.org, go ahead and take a look there now. It's just a little static page with an email address, but eventually it will be much, much more. Thanks.
Well, just a huge thank you for your contributions as part of the T3 Innovation Network in terms of, we called it a really long engagement of talent pipeline management and the T3 Innovation Network, and we finally got married. Last year, we had an opportunity, thanks to some grant funding from Walmart. We brought together TPM practitioners, TPM Academy graduates like Paige with members of the T3 Innovation Network, and really started to try to do a deep dive into what the digital transformation journey could be for talent pipeline management practitioners. So if we're thinking about those really sticky talent challenges that they're trying to solve, how can some of the solutions that have been created as a result of T3 Innovation Network, many of the partners that are in the room today, how can those two things come together? And so we learned a whole lot from that workshop, a lot of improvements that can be made for future workshops, and we do plan to continue to bring together the communities in hopes that we can all lift up one another's work, but even more importantly, get the type of systemic change that we're aiming for. So it's an exciting way for us to think about our future.
And I think this panel has been a reflection of what was shared out this morning from the crowd of collaboration, data, progress, innovation. The fact that all of these communities are talking to each other, are talking about very similar issues, but really bringing different perspectives to the table to help enrich policy development and implementation in ways that we're seeing really exciting progress over the past year or so. And I'm excited myself to continue working with these partners and partners like yourselves over the next few years to see what further progress we can achieve. So please join me in thanking our panelists for joining today.
So great job to the panel before us. So thank you, Amanda, Madeline, Paige, Clay, and Jamie. My name's Peter Beard. I serve as a vice president here at the Chamber Foundation as part of the education workforce team. I started in January, but coming from the Greater Houston Partnership's Upskill Houston initiative, so I've been a longtime partner with the Chamber Foundation. One of the things I wanted to share today is really some of the work that we see both in communities and then when you aggregate it at a national level is we're going to have an unprecedented opportunity to upskill and reskill the workforce in our country, in our regions, and other things. And when you think about it, the tools that exist today were built for a different time. When you think about it today, how quickly skills are changing. You know, in the last 3 years, the average job has seen 1/3 of its skills change. That's a quick change. And when you think about it, 25% of the jobs have had a significant skill turnover in that space. So how are we going to, in many respects, upskill and reskill almost 170 million workers that exist in the country? In my work in Houston, some of the things we had done was to begin looking at how do we work with about half of the workforce that don't make enough to make ends meet, which means they have a huge opportunity to think about what are the upskilling and reskilling opportunities. So I'm here today to kind of share with you about the opportunity when you think about if we had to upskill and reskill 60 million workers and we had some ability to have $100 billion of funds to help upskill and reskill folks, what would that mean for us? And I'm really thinking about how would we do that? So the Chamber Foundation, as part of its talent finance initiative, has been looking at something called a skills savings account. Think about it as an FSA or HSA, but for skills. Imagine employers and employees contributing to the account that would help folks be able to upskill and reskill those things. So I have a question for all of you. How many of you since January 1 have done some sort of upskilling, whether it's watching a video, attending a course, you know, whatever, and this can't include compliance training, that doesn't count. But how many of you have had done some sort of upskilling or reskilling since January 1? Some of it was probably free, but some of it probably cost money. So how do we ensure that folks can access that and have the funds to do it? This will also require us to think about how do we incentivize this using the tax code to do that. Many of you know that under Section 127, employers can contribute up to $5,250 to employees to help them upskill and not be charged, have the employee treated, have that treated as income by the employee. So how do we leverage that provision of the code to think about how are we going to upskill and reskill folks at this piece of it? We really want to think about an account that's owned by the employee, so it's portable, it prioritizes skills, and it has multiple sources of funding, but primarily employer and employee contributions, but it could also include public sector dollars, it can include other charities and others to contribute to that. But that's an important priority for the Chamber and the Chamber Foundation to be thinking about. So you also begin to think about it in many respects of how do we also think about it in terms of ensuring it's being used for its purposes. So we obviously have FinTech, which is used with HSAs and FSAs to make sure eligible expenses. But in all the work the T3 Innovation Network has been doing, think about what that has been up to. That has been up to how are we thinking about learning and employment records, skills validations, linked claims, all the things that you all have been working on, are part of the ed tech piece of this, and combining both the FinTech and ed tech become critically important so that people can see how much money they have, where they can use it, how do they validate the skills and credentials they received and make that available to employers. But we think this is an important opportunity for us to advance and ensure that folks have the funds to do it. When you think about the amount of investment, both on the public side and the private side, there's probably not enough to meet the challenge of upskilling and reskilling at least a third, or if not more, of our workforce to do that. So that's one of the things we've been thinking about and working on. But part of it is these are some of the projects that would get embedded in this. The LAR and digital wallets, Experience U, so that we can identify and bring forward past skills and credentials. How do we also link the claims? And then how do we help people produce the resume? But those are some of the tools that you all have been working on and innovating, but now how do we link it in a way that actually helps workers and helps employers to ensure they have the skilled workforce and the skills they need to be successful? And when you think about it in today's world and what's going on and the uncertainty, how do we ensure that the benefits accrue to both the employee in getting a better job and the employer in having the skilled workforce it needs to compete in today's environment? So when you think about what comes next, we really need to tap into the current economic security and mobility conversations that are going on, which is how do we ensure that our workforce is the unparalleled skilled workforce in the world to deliver in a globally competitive economy. We also need to be meeting workers where they are, which means if we imagine if we had $100 billion of potential investments, think of the marketplace that could be created for education, for training providers to be able to do that. It also raises the secondary question of quality assurance. And we know that there are a lot of things going on in today's marketplace where folks are looking at how do we ensure and document the ability of a credential of value that actually creates the value that's there. But we're seeing that with CredLens, we're seeing that with Equos, we're seeing that with some of the work that's going on in the T3 Innovation Network. But quality assurance is going to be another thing that needs to show up. But that's going to be the marketplace in light of the demand for the skills that are coming. And how do we ensure that training providers and education providers are actually helping to do that? We also think we need to engage the administration and Congress, particularly as they begin thinking about the renewal of the tax code and addressing the tax code in some of the upcoming bills. But more importantly, once you enable this infrastructure, we need to be testing and piloting it in order to bring it to scale. You know, you can't just bring something to scale. When you think about the innovations that states have been doing from, you know, the early 90s with the creation of the 529 plans, those were innovations that took time to build and do that. So we'll be looking for public and private stakeholders to work, which also includes employers. You know, so obviously SHRM and the SHRM Foundation are critical partners of ours as we think about how do we bring this in as an employee benefit. And then finally, how do we build the movement and ensure that we have a diverse marketplace that provides the quality. But those are the challenges that we think the economy is confronting today that we really need to be thinking about going forward. I'm briefly going to say, are there any questions? I know they're not anticipating this, so I'll repeat the question so folks know. Yeah, go ahead.
I think under the current tax code, you can only use the credits for 2 and 4-year institutions. Is there a work on?
I mean, the idea would be just broadly education. The question was, is it only dedicated to 2 and 4 years? You know, under the tax code, the employer has to create an education plan which defines what is eligible from that employer's perspective. So they can narrow it, to your point, to 2 years or 4 years, or someone like a Walmart, you know, an Amazon can actually broaden it to something that's not necessarily a 2-year or 4-year, but a shorter term degree and credential. But it really is based upon the employer's education plan that they adopt. Yes? Well, it kind of depends. When are we targeting to have this online? It kind of depends if we can get the tax code and integrate it in the tax code, but it is a priority of the Chamber and Chamber Foundation, so we would expect sometime in probably the midsummer when the tax code would come up for renewal and, you know, any adjustments to it.
Could you take a moment to differentiate this idea from maybe an expansion of what an ITA might mean in the WIOA system?
I think the way we would differentiate it is, you know, in the ITA and the WIOA system, it's paid to the provider as opposed to the individual. It may be paid on the individual's behalf, but it's paid generally to the provider, not directly to the individual. And this would allow the individual to have choice in terms of what they wanted to be working on. We think that, you know, the eligible training provider list becomes a critical source document for where folks could go for training and getting guidance for that, but we need that as a critical part to that. I saw a hand up over somewhere. Go ahead.
So we partly answered my question with the ETPL, but I'm trying to picture the infrastructure that we all need in order for employers and the people who want to get this upskilling to know what are good sources and how they map to what they're trying to achieve, because this becomes much more micro, it becomes much more complicated.
It does. And that's where we think the innovations that CredLens, EQUOS, and others are going to help provide that kind of quality assurance. But it's going to take time. We're certainly not there yet. But in many respects, you know, if we need folks and employers need to be providing guidance as well, what skills are you going to need to kind of move? But it's intended to be a little more kind of allow the marketplace to operate. I see a question here and then over here. Go ahead.
I was just wondering if you've done any studies in similar schemes in other countries. I can speak for Italy, where employers have to pay a certain percentage of their payroll into a scheme which is organized by the government. The government participates as well. In that scheme, the employees don't contribute. The risk could be that I see the employees have a different agenda that is not aligned to what they want to study with their employers. Have you considered this?
We've looked at some of those. Part of it is just, in some sense, kind of the situation we're in the United States in terms of how a lot of that has worked. We also acknowledge that the public dollars probably don't get to the level that are needed to reskill at the scale that needs to happen. But we do think, you know, that the account should be flexible enough to allow multiple folks to contribute to it for specific purposes. But we have looked at some of those opportunities. But in many respects, the infrastructure that exists today with our FSAs and HSAs, but also other things like ESAs, education savings accounts, begin the financial infrastructure that's important there. Yes?
So I think one other term that I would love to hear as part of this is future skilling, because I think the mentality around reskilling, upskilling is fantastic, but there's also things are changing so swiftly. Thinking about what's the future going to look like and how do we start to build in skills that are going to get folks ready so they don't have to have, we know we're going to have to transition many times in our careers, but maybe there's allows for less transition if we're future skilling and we're helping folks understand what that looks like and how to get there. I think the second piece of this is in really understanding how we take the skills someone has already and we help build on those so that we're not necessarily having folks start over per se, but also pursue opportunities that are in line with what they're already doing and doing very well, right? And so that requires, I think, some hand-holding and some counseling to support folks navigating a system like this, because to Deb's point, like it could get very complicated to kind of send them to their own devices and say, hey, here's what you want to do. We know this, go figure it out. But they might not necessarily understand what that formula needs to look like for them to get to their North Star.
No, I think that's right. And so I think to this point, career navigation and career guidance is going to be critically important. And how do we use the technologies that are emerging to help architect those pathways? I'm going to take a very quick detour to some time I spent, my time I spent in Houston, and one of the last projects we worked on was with the Burning Glass Institute on a project called Jobs That Mobilize. And it was this idea of like, how do you look at skill adjacencies from an origin role to what Burning Glass would describe as a job that mobilizes to a destination job. And those become the beginnings of how do we begin to show those pathways, because it's not just the theoretical, the skills are adjacent, but what Burning Glass Institute was able to do was to say these are transitions that have actually occurred, and how do we ensure that they're not random, but they're actually helping people to guide it. And so I think technology is going to help people in many ways understand those pathways and those skills. And then I think the second question you really raised or inherent to that was, what are the frontier skills that we need to be thinking about to ensure that folks are ready? And so in many respects, if we're dealing with low-wage, middle-wage populations, we've got to help them get to a more stable place and then think about here are the frontier and future skills. You have a question?
Yes, I think we're talking a lot around this question of individuals having 10, 15, 20 or more jobs over a 50 or 60-year work span as longevity increases. And so one of the challenges when you describe the current system is that the employers define the breadth of the kind of training they're willing to support, when in fact the majority of these kinds of the longer-term trajectories involve pivots to things that are completely outside any given employer's current responsibilities. So what's your sense of how you negotiate being able to provide that kind of autonomy and sovereignty to the individual in the design of this?
I mean, that's part of the reason to have the account owned by the employee. But I also think, the idea is like we're going to have to see this as a much more transactional account. It's not a savings account to kind of save for your institution, but how do we actually, build that autonomy in there? And then how do we also work with employers to actually view it as a benefit that they're trying to use to retain their workforce, which also means helping people navigate to this earlier question, what are the jobs that we're going to need in the future? There's always going to be some risk of folks using it to depart the employer, but that's always been a risk for the employer. Are we finished on questions? Because if not, I'm standing between you and a break. But thank you for taking the time, and appreciate kind of the conversation and the points which are really important for us as we think about how to kind of articulate and build the coalition that's going to be necessary to do that. You all have been great. We'll be reconvening at 10:40, and so you have a networking break for the balance until 10:40. So looking forward to it, and thank you very much. Appreciate it.
This is a friendly 2-minute warning. So the networking break has 2 minutes left. And then we're excited to hear from Sharon Liu from JFF, who recently put out a great report on digital wallets and a landscape and investigation into where digital wallets stand today, which are a critical component of LER ecosystem and adoption and scaling LER. So 2 minutes to take your seats, and then we're excited for the next section of the programming. Thank you.
Oh, I have a question about the clicker.
Oh.
Okay, now we've sorted, I think. Great. So thank you for inviting me to share a little bit about the work that we've been doing. I'm really excited to be here. The T3 network is always such a great place to connect with people who are doing exciting work and to sort of build future collaborations. So I hope that this is a way for us to do that as well. My name is Sharon Liu, and okay. Oops, sorry. I should have rehearsed that. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a report that we recently received, recently published. It's a market scan, and this is sort of the general sections of it, but I think I'll go pretty quickly so we can maybe take some questions, and I think that we've been warned by Amanda not to do a lot of techno-baggle, so hopefully this will be understandable as well. Let's see. All right, so my name is Sharon Liu, and I work for an organization called JFF, which I think is known to many people in this room. Our North Star is to enable 75 million adults who face barriers to access opportunity. And my team specifically at JFF Labs thinks a ton about how technology and technology infrastructure can be an important tool to allow that to happen. One of the things that we do at JFF Labs is we produce insights. And insights, including these market scans, are a way for us to scan the market for any given technology, but not necessarily to produce a catalog of all of what's shiny. It's a way for us to identify mission-aligned companies and organizations who are building the kinds of technology that can make significant social impact. So this is an example of this document. So in 2022, I'll tell you the beginning of the story. We published a market scan on how digital wallets can enable a verifiable credentials-based learning and employment records ecosystem. We recently, a couple weeks ago, just published a refresh of that market scan. So the question that we asked ourselves internally is, do we need to refresh the market scan? Like, why do we need to do this? Is it because there are more companies? Yes. But is that what's important? But what we, I think, came to is that actually the changes in the technology ecosystem allow us today to tell a different story than what we were telling in 2022. So this is going to be a presentation about a story that involves digital wallets. It's not just about the technology, though, but it's actually a story about how technology and technology systems can be built or rebuilt so that they show up differently for people and actually become the tools that they need in order to prosper in their communities. Okay. Oops, sorry. Not good at this. Okay, so fundamentally, many of you have presented already about the work that was done in learning employment records. Certainly the panel that was on earlier did this as well. And we also think that they're critically important. Digital wallets as a way for us to store and share the variety of credentials that we receive as we experience and learn and in our jobs and as we access opportunities. And I think we're starting to see some excellent examples of this in Alabama and Arkansas, many of the Skills Forward projects that we've heard about today. But fundamentally, the technology infrastructure that's underneath that is something called the verifiable credential. And they make it possible for all of the different records of all of the different skills and experiences that you have to sit together in a place, but most importantly, to make sure that they are actually the unaltered, the authentic, and the valid sort of credentials about yourself. So I'll just give you one example. And I'll say up front that examples are not endorsements. There are no affiliate links where you can get a discount, although please do click because we do like the clicks. And so what you're seeing here is a company called Credivera. They're based in Canada. And their product, this is their wallet. And what you're looking at is actually exactly what we think an LER wallet should look like, and like the ones that many of you are developing. So it shows background of education credentials, a couple of licenses and certificates, and occupational health credentials. So for this is a wallet that has their learning and employment record. But actually, what's interesting as well is that for John, it shows that this is actually John whose sort of learning and employment record gives him access to participate in a job. So this is a wallet that was developed by a company called Canna Energy and Construction, one of the largest construction companies in Alberta, Canada. And what they have is for every single one of their employees, an employee wallet that does have the traditional LER content, but also if John wanted to access the Courts Center work site, he's obviously got the green light to do that, but he's missing several of the requirements in order to access the central library. So it also gives John, as an employee, guidance on what other credentials and certifications he needs to access certain job sites. For the employer, Canna Construction, what they needed was to streamline the process of making sure that people got on site who were eligible to be on the site for this, for safety and regulation purposes, as well as tracking whether the certifications were expired or, out of date. So a system like this saved Canna more than $3,500 per employee for managing this. So what we say a lot at JFF is good for workers, good for employers, and this is an example of how an LER not only is good for the worker as far as their own professional development, but also good for the company. But what we want to do is tell the story in a different way, right? So I said initially our story was how might we use the technology to redesign systems that show up for people. So we know that it's not merely a technology upgrade. What I'm not telling you is every company should get a digital wallet for their employers, although that would be great. Call me later if you want to talk about that. We're talking about what is the human-centered imperative that we have, and how can the tools that we have available to us now actually allow us not only to transform our talent strategies, but the entire ecosystems that enable that to happen. So one example that we highlight is the story of the Trusted Learner Network, Arizona State University. I know many of you have worked with Kate and her team as well. Very talented software engineers, but I think something that we thought was really important was that this technology stack that they have made available, they have developed and they support, actually can enable lesser resourced institutions to participate in this kind of technology transformation so that the affordances of these digital wallets and the tools are available not only to institutions and organizations with fancy grant funding, but also to smaller, less well-resourced organizations. And in addition to that, through this network that they are cultivating to think about what are the governance questions and policies that might need to be in place so that people can continue to trust the data about themselves. Okay, so another story that we tell of sort of digital transformation is a product developed by a company called Digital Bazaar. So imagine a scenario where it's a natural disaster like a hurricane or a wildfire. And what happens is there's a big call for support from a variety of first responders that are local as well as state and national. And they converge onto the disaster site, and an incident commander in charge of the site needs to do several things at the same time, including validating that an individual's credential, their EMS level 1 medical technician, is valid, that they have appropriate skills that are matched to the need, and to be able to see who are all of their resources and how to deploy them according to their experience and skills. So as a replacement, because currently it happens a paper-based card, there's a digital version where people can very easily see whether the credential is expired, what are the specific skills, and then whether for safety purposes they are on-site or off-site or need to be rescued. So thinking about this as the first step to digitizing a digital process, right? So, I think that we're all very used to the education side where you do the community college course, you get the EMT certification, you get a badge. Here's a very concrete example of how a badge is used digitally in the field to deploy resources more efficiently. But I think the interesting thing about this is if you think about who are the victims of the disasters on the site, what happens is their house is flooded or their house is on fire or something else terrible has happened, and they maybe don't have access to the digital documents that prove that they own that house for insurance purposes, or that they have a driver's license so that they're eligible for aid locally. And so using this digital wallet that Digital Bazaar has created, first responders on site are able to issue verifiable credentials to disaster victims that attest to some of these identity and property associated sort of credentials are. And because of the way it's designed, it can work in an offline mode as well, because often on these disaster sites, there's no internet. Printed on paper later, if necessary, with like barcodes, for example, so that they can later be used as part of the verification for reinstating these credentials. And I'll tell you one other story of systems showing up for people. So a lot of people in California's agriculture industry are recipients of federal benefits and state benefits from a variety of nonprofit organizations as well as government entities. A lot of times it's regionally specific, and for this particular population, moving regionally within a year happens quite frequently. And so not only is there a situation where people who have, I guess, don't have ready access to official documentation of their identity as well as their eligibility, and the entities that are giving out the benefits don't have an easy way of verifying that the person is eligible for the benefits that they're getting. We talked about a project that happened as a partnership between a company called Ontadad and the United Farm Workers Foundation to create a farm worker wallet. This wallet held documents that were sort of describing not only the eligibility of the individual to receive benefits, the eligibility of the individuals to be working in the United States, as well as other identity and important informations. So through this project, especially over the COVID-19 period where there was actually additional aid available to these workers, I think 8 organizations across the state of California were able to distribute over $80 million of aid efficiently to about 125,000 farm workers in a way that was traceable and in a way that was highly efficient. Okay, so I think that what I'm not saying is buy an entire system now to change a whole problem, right? So the question might be, what is the technology and what should we be doing in our work? And again, I promise I won't go down I've distilled this down to just 2 slides so that we don't have to go down a very large technology sort of rabbit hole, but want to talk about really how this is fundamentally an infrastructure that enables digital trust and a trusted ecosystem where people are at the center. And thinking about how mainstream tools that do verification services can actually also access these as well. So here are some of the notable trends that we identify and talk about in our market scan. The issue of state identity, state like the states of the United States, but also capital S state as in the countries. And a very interesting case study that we talk about is in the country of Bhutan, which is on this slide, and how they are now sort of transitioning towards wallet-based, passwordless government services across all of the services, including education and employment that citizens participate in. There's also a number of other things on this slide that I will not get into, and I will just move on to opportunities for impact. And since this is a story of how systems are built to support people, this is also, the question then is, how do we do this? What do we buy? What do we think about as we are thinking about our own personal digital transformations and all of the transformations that you are working on? So we've identified sort of 4 sort of values or pillars here. The first opportunity that we talk about is lifelong learning, and making sure that in addition to standards conformance, which is an excellent starting place, that we start to think about demonstrating interoperability and portability as a critical component of our ecosystems. Secondly, thinking about individual agency and control, making sure that people have control over the credentials that are about their skills and employment history as well as their identity, and making sure that as they store and share this information, that they actually have control over who can see them, where they can be seen, and how to respond if there are sort of nefarious intrusions into data systems. And finally, thinking about how digital tools need to serve a variety of people. And, obviously a lot of companies, they look for product market fit, and most of the market can use a digital cell phone with 5G internet. But what if we designed systems so that people without 5G and the latest cell phone could also access them, or people with low digital literacy or differences in learning? So we've included something that is a vendor selection toolkit. Now, this is a little new for us. This is our first foray into translating a lot of technical information into maybe practical tips for how to engage with the many vendors in this ecosystem. Give us some feedback. We'd love to know how you've used this, if it's useful at all. And like whether you think that there are different questions that we can be answering as general guidelines. Now, this toolkit is meant to just be guidelines because we actually think that individual projects have different goals, and based on the different goals for digital transformation, you will necessarily need different tools. There's not one sort of one-size-fits-all response to what tools should we buy. And again, going back to what I said earlier, the different stories that we've told involving different companies in the market scan are not necessarily endorsements of their products, because the farm worker wallet may work great for agriculture workers in California, but not for tech workers in New York City, although who knows, right? So what's next? So I'm also not going to dwell on this slide because I realize that we are getting onto time and I should stop talking soon. But here are some of the ideas for the projects that are technology projects that we think will allow the entire systems of technology that we engage with on a daily basis actually be designed to support the people that we want to be successful. So with that, I think there's just 2 minutes left, and I said I would take a question, so I guess there's enough time for just one question. Okay, Nate.
What's needed after the wallet space develops robustly? And you see, what's the next stage of conversation around where credentials go outside of the wallet and into the verifier?
What does it take to do a market scan of that? If you have an idea for, if you want to write me a check, I'll do a market scan on anything you want me to do a market scan on. But I think you're asking exactly the right question, right? So in 2022, we just looked at wallets, places to store and share credentials. But the story that we're trying to tell here is that actually it's changed a lot. We don't actually just engage in technology episodically. Technology surrounds us, and so now more and more, our digital wallets are tools for expressing our entire digital identity. Peter talked about your finances. This is the easiest thing for people to understand is the Apple Pay, the Google Pay, scanning at an airport, your digital driver's license, which many states have right now. And so thinking about moving to entire systems where your engagement with your experience online on a computer logging on is also a digital engagement. So I think that we are towards the point where the wallets are a solid foundation of understanding digital identity, but also for us, something on the cutting room floor that we do want to explore more is the implications on privacy in a digital world and where that intersects with civil liberties. So this is a topic that is on my wish list. Anyone here can write me a check and I will definitely talk more about that. So thanks for the question and for your time. Come talk to me later about digital wallets or farm workers or anything else. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you, and that was awesome from Sharon. I certainly appreciate kind of the investments and the collaboration that she's been enabling throughout her time and tenure in advancing kind of the connection that needs to exist between education and the workforce. In just sharing with you my thoughts this morning, I just want to give you a bit of a, if you will, a setup to what I want to share. Is simply that some of the things that we've actually learned from the 25 plus years of innovating at WGU. And what does actually, if you will, apply for that future. But we're going to combine that with some of the foundational beliefs that I think have to be part of our talent economy, and then giving you some design principles around that with the hope that it will spur some questions from you. I do want to leave some questions at the time for questions at the end. Should you have particular things that you'd want to talk about more deeply. But with that being said, let me provide for you just a quick drive-by of Western Governors University. If you haven't heard of WGU before, I am sorry for that. I've not been doing my job very well, but WGU is now actually the largest university in the country based upon full-time enrollment. And we now graduate over nearly 60,000 individuals will graduate this year from WGU. But we were established by governors of 19 Western states and territories. I often like to point out that you have to ask yourself the questions well, why is it that governors of states actually decide to create a private nonprofit university when they already had their public higher ed systems? Well, it was very purposefully driven to expand access among those populations or those communities of their residents that were not engaging in post-secondary education. They knew that they needed to activate all that talent into their respective workforces to power their economies. We are unapologetically student-centered. I think this will be a key design principle that you'll hear me talk about later as well. Now, some of that means that we started from scratch creating a very different model of how you think about how education actually works. Making sure that you're aligning it with the workforce needs, making sure that you're personalizing the instruction and the learning journey to increase the probability that every student succeeds, and ultimately also leveraging tech. Technology is fundamentally one of the most powerful tools we have to design and develop the models and methods and systems that we need to ensure that what needs to work for every individual can be enabled by technology. If you didn't know, you'll get a sense here as to the profile of WGU. These numbers actually get out of date every day. We operate in a very different model in the sense that we enroll students every month. We also now have micro-credential programs and course programs that you can actually start any day. And so I think we're now serving nearly 190,000 students but we'll graduate nearly 60,000, as I mentioned earlier. You can see pretty quickly that on the left-hand side of that, over 70% of our students are coming from one or more categories of underserved individuals. At the same time, you can see on the right side of that is like we were designed for what is the most common kind of model of an individual today in the post-secondary system, and that is a working individual. Someone who already has all these other demands on their time. That the kind of Hollywood notion of college where you get to leave the parents' house and go live on a campus or at least near a campus and commit all your time and energy to doing nothing but school, which, by the way, oddly is fewer hours committed than you were in high school. And yet, that's not actually what happens. Like, there's very known data that even only 13% of freshmen today live on campus in post-secondary. So you can get a sense of what WGU is today. By the way, our model does, we believe, works very well. The outcomes that we drive for our students are fundamentally about enabling economic mobility for them, making sure that they have a high probability of completing, that if completing, they also have the skills, knowledge, and ability that they need to acquire or attain the opportunity that education was a pathway for in the first place. So we're very clear and focused on our ability to ensure that our graduates are getting the jobs that they want and gaining the economic outcomes that they expect to achieve. That $30,000 within 4 years of graduation, by the way, that is actually about $8,000 more than the national average of college graduates. And these are individuals who don't come from privileged backgrounds. One thing I will also point out is that we very much focus on 3 key results at WGU. It's fundamentally about completion, it's about return for our graduates, and it's about equity in both. In fact, for education to be the promise for an individual to change their life for the better, it has to work for everyone. And so we are focused on probably the most noble of endeavors in education, which is enabling individual economic mobility. And we'll talk about that further. So some just of the quick things that we've learned. Education is an end in and of itself. It is a means to an end. That in fact, until you actually, all that knowledge, skill, and ability that one acquires through education, until you have an opportunity to apply it, it actually doesn't have any value. It mostly is then very intrinsically oriented. But in fact, until an individual engages in the community and their society and the workplace, etc., education hasn't in fact fulfilled its promise. So education has to be a path to opportunity if we actually believe in what we intend to show that we believe, which is we're investing in the $80+ billion of federal loans, $45+ billion annually in Pell Grant loans, $20 billion in Title I. Like, as a society, we believe that in fact education is an engine of opportunity. If it's going to be that, it has to be a path to opportunity. So the other key thing we know is that one of the scams that can exist in higher education, that access without completion, is in fact that, a scam. Access has to come with completion. The best measure of access is in fact whether opportunity worked for the individuals who started and enrolled in higher education. That if you don't complete, you're actually often worse off than had you never started. Meaning that most of those individuals who start and don't complete are left with debt, but no better readied for the opportunity. What we also know is that it's about competency. It's about what you know, not how you actually acquired that knowledge. And yet, too often, we end up over-indexing on how one acquires knowledge, skill, and ability rather than are you just competent? Because the thing that, in fact, the workforce cares about is whether or not you, in fact, have skills that you've been verified as proficient in. Because ultimately, the workforce and the employers that comprise it, they care about that. They don't really care about how you acquired that. Now, that's not to say that each of us individually don't have our biases, meaning that we think certain individuals from certain programs and certain institutions are somehow more talented. But that is actually just a fallacy. It's a delusion. So we'll talk about that too in terms of foundational beliefs. The last thing we also know is that skills by themselves without networks will not translate into opportunity for an individual. So with that being said, it's like we recognize that we're not done. There are all these forces that are still kind of propelling us forward to reimagine what that talent economy needs to look like, what the talent supply chain needs to look like. For all of you kind of in the employer and workforce space, we already know this, but it's worth saying is that of all the supply chains that power our economy, whether it's physical goods supply chain, whether it's money flow, or talent of those supply chains, the least digitized of them is in fact the talent supply chain. It's so odd if you just think about how 40 plus years ago, EDI first entered into the realm of physical supply chains, and companies and employers, manufacturers, buyers and sellers of goods, shipping and logistics, they started digitizing their supply chain more than 4 decades ago, probably 50 years ago. If you think about the money flow and the existence of kind of, cross-border trade and cross-border money flow, is like that also started 40 plus years ago. And yet here we are in the talent supply chain, the most important resource into our workforce, and we're still dealing with physical resumes. Even if LinkedIn is a great source for it, it's like people don't get hired if you don't submit a resume for someone to review. And then we rely upon some antiquated notion of that, a subjective interview somehow can actually surface whether or not the individual you're talking to actually possesses the verified proficiency that you need to be, for an individual needs to have to be in that job and be successful. So you've heard great things already from Sharon talking about how the learning and employment records can go a long way in starting to provide a basis of a language that in fact employers and individuals use to make this talent economy much more efficient than it was before. But there's even other key things to note across the bottom of this, is that even today, the individuals within their world of work do not feel like the opportunities that they see are available to them, either because they can't see the path they need to pursue, or on the right side of that, which is they don't even feel like the employers or the places that they're working are feeling like they're investing in their talent development. It's left to the individual to figure that out on themselves. You can see the other data on the top right of that. It's just point out is like right now it feels like we're still living in the promise of, I reference the analogy of the Kennedy promise to put a person on the moon, put a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth. It's like that seems like the declarations that we've had over the last 3 to 4 years to say we're moving to skills-based hiring. But the tools and technology and that common language isn't there yet, such that 1 in 700 of this last year were actually hired on the basis of skills. And even if you had the skills transcript that exists for an individual, the likelihood that the individual is hiring on that basis is actually pretty low because of persisting biases that exist, where in fact I want to look for a degree from a certain school, etc. Now that's not to say that in fact we don't need all sorts of credentials in that future economy, but it does mean that the degree or the appropriate credentials offer an incredible amount of optionality to the holder of it. Just think about this weird reality that we at least live in the US, which is you could be 30 years into your career and profession, having gained all of your expertise through work, and yet oddly, they often still lead with, and this person went to this school and got this degree. Like, I'm pretty sure I learned way more in the last 3 decades than I did in the 6 years I went to school. But somehow that still matters. That's my point of these biases that still persist in our talent supply chains. So the talent economy is fundamentally this, is like how do we connect inherently capable individuals with a workforce that depends upon that human talent to thrive. If any of you are at employers, and we're like this, we have 10,000 employees roughly at WGU now, and we look at locations where in fact we're putting offices, etc. And the first question we ask is, can we access the talent we need for the roles to power WGU's innovation and priorities going forward? That is the truth. So the purpose of higher education in that context can be different. The assumed purpose has often been, for the last 2 centuries in the US alone, that, it's actually about advancing knowledge, meaning we're going to put at the center of that these esteemed faculty that are going to be experts in their field, and they're going to advance the frontier of knowledge in that field. That's the research agenda of higher education. The other side of that is the teaching agenda or the teaching mission of higher education. It's like, how do we transfer all that knowledge to the individual? But you can see how quickly that's being disrupted today. It's like there hardly is a subject I can think of that ChatGPT can't teach me it right now. I could be in a 1-week course and learn all about quantum computing, that instead someone would rather have me sit in a 15-week program for 3 lectures a week, etc., to exist in. Like, we know that the world of knowledge and how it actually is gained and accessed and even advanced is changing rapidly. Maybe the future should really be about how are we enabling economic mobility by connecting individuals to opportunity. That is one of the most noble endeavors we can think about. I've never met an engaged citizen who didn't also have a great job. Those are not contending priorities. They're the same thing. We want individuals who, in fact, are thriving. To be thriving, one of the most important things is being economically self-reliant. That's actually a really, really noble thing to do. And too often in higher education, we think about it as being the, oh no, we don't want to make it transactional or just job training. And yet 3/4 of the individuals going into it say, I'm going to college so that I can get a great job. That disconnect still exists. So let me give you 5 foundational beliefs. I'm going to do a drive-by in this because I want to focus on 6 design principles. But some of the foundational beliefs are this: that in fact, every individual actually does have inherent worth. They already were born with it. It's because they're human. They, if given the opportunity, have something big to contribute. This directly contends with the notion of meritocracy, that somehow certain people have earned it, or that they have the right to it in a way that others don't. I personally know that that is just a delusion. Those usually that we deem to be worth it have mostly been provided affordances that in fact others don't have. That they've progressed to a point that says, oh, we think these are the ones who are most talented to be in the few number of seats that we have here. You can see how quickly that in fact is a constraint-based mindset. That's the second key point here, is abundance is an incredible concept. Even in our economy, it only grows and grows more quickly when more people are contributing to it. And yet we approach this too often from the standpoint of like, oh, there's only so many opportunities, and so we have to get the best people in it. But in fact, when you have more people contribute to it, opportunity just expands because they're contributing all of their innovative thinking and all of their endeavor and all of their motivations and ambition and everything else, that they create opportunity. Next thing is simply this notion of boundless capacity. Every individual has innate capacity for learning. There's 2 really good things. If you look at Bloom's study from 40 years ago and Kettinger and et al. Study from Carnegie Mellon just a year and a half ago, that highlighted the fact individuals actually surprisingly learn at pretty consistent rates. The biggest difference is where they're starting relative to the proficiency level. Such that if you're closer to it and you only give them 15 weeks, guess who gets the A? The one who was already closer to the level of proficiency expected. And if you're further away from it, you get a B, and if you're further away from it still, you get a C. But all those individuals actually learned at surprisingly a pretty consistent rate. You need 7 attempts to master as a concept, a topic, etc. We actually do all possess innate capacity learning. It doesn't mean that we all have the same aptitudes. We may have, in fact, have the complement of gifts. This ability to say that, in fact, you can create incredible value because you see the synergy of the different gifts individuals have, rather than assuming every individual has to be skilled in the same things. And so more and more management theory has to be focusing on how do you actually comprise a team that has the complement of the skills that are needed, rather than everyone's going to be assessed with the same skills. But you employers, think about how performance management exists out there. Oh, I have this number of high potential people. But the yardstick individuals use for the high potential individuals assumes that they all have to be skilled equally in the same things. That's not how even a professional sports team is actually comprised. Lastly, this idea of mutual stewardship, that in fact, the success and progress of the individuals with whom I work or the individuals I manage, that is as important as my own progress. In fact, the benefit we have is if we put the success and progress of another, it only ends up returning good to us in our own progress. So with that kind of foundational belief, let me just in closing give you 6 design principles for what the town economy should look like in the future. First and foremost, you have to start with the individual. Everything about what we design in the town economy, it has to work for the individual first. If it doesn't, everything else fails. And by the way, it is an individual such that even if we talk about millions of people, you actually have to make it work for the one individual and then do that millions of times. We've certainly learned at WGU on a simple principle of 1 by 1 that says we solve for the individual student and we achieve outcomes one student at a time. Graduating 60,000 plus individuals this year means that we did it 60,000 times for one. That's actually the key point in it. They are our most valuable resource. We know this in terms of our own GDP growth. If you want GDP to grow, you need more people contributing to it, and you need their output to increase. It's just the volume of individuals and the productivity per individual. That's actually what creates that. We have to keep our focus on the individual. Second, it has to be skills architected and competency-based. There's no doubt that this I don't know whether it's just simply privilege or landed gentry or whatever that we persist as a tradition that somehow we think everyone's supposed to go through what we deem to be this post-secondary college model. That's how we're going to actually pursue this. That's just wrong. One of the things that we're endeavoring at WGU right now is to figure out how to actually credential all the skills that are being learned at work. If you think about these, what is it, 2/3 of jobs in the future are going to require post-secondary credentials in the future? Well, you're not going to get those 100 million individuals who don't have them to enroll in post-secondary systems. But how do you credential all the skills they're already gaining on the job? So how do you give them the same kind of, if you will, token to say, I also have the same proficiency as someone who went through a different path? And all of those paths are equal. Why? Because it's competency that matters, not the brand on a credential or the program, the name of the program you went through or something else like that. What matters is competency. Next key principle is that everything should be contemplated in the notion of multimodal and first and next. By simply trying to do my best to give you an example of what that looks like on the right side of this chart, that we need to let go of this notion that we have this coming of age experience that happens one time in life, and somehow that sets you up for then 4 decades plus of success. And the only place, by the way, that this can occur is on a college campus. As if all those other 35-year-olds never became adults because they didn't go to college on a campus. How stupid is that? And yet we still want to keep driving all these policies and practices that says, oh no, that's the thing that needs to happen. And somehow that's also supposed to make up for all the other things that they didn't learn in the home or they didn't learn in K-12 or everything else. That, oh man, if they had this, everything's going to be great. But that's actually wrong. And even if we think about that design, how an individual acquires skills, it's happening through multiple different methods and modes and models and everything else. It's like, again, we have to just assume the way in which we acquire knowledge, skill, and ability today is totally different and totally enabled by technology. The other key thing is that no, we're not doing this once and never doing it again. We're actually doing it once and then doing it again and doing it again and doing it again. In fact, our model has to start shifting to the notion of a lifetime learning account that says, hey, whether I actually get a degree right out of the gate, or whether I first get a credential and then get another credential, and maybe 10 or 15 years later, I might actually add a degree to that. I'm going to do this multiple times. Why? Because it's going to be relevant to the opportunity I'm pursuing next. So that's this idea, is that you have to think about continual learning and first and next. This is a key point that Raj Chetty actually highlights in all of his research, that in fact, if we aren't enabling networks or the social capital that is necessary to translate proficiency and opportunity, we fail. 80% of those jobs are coming through connections. That's from Julia Friedland Fisher, who actually works at the Christensen Institute. But that is reaffirming kind of what Raj Chetty surfaced, that oddly, if you have individuals that are friends of yours on Facebook that are in a higher income quintile, that's as likely a predictor of that individual's economic mobility as whether or not you went to college, as whether or not you actually were in a certain type of job, et cetera. It's like the most important predictor is, do you know individuals who represent the opportunities that are now going to be surfaced and exposed to you, as well as pathways and networks to actually access them. Lastly, I will be hard-pressed to be convinced that there isn't something in our lives that hasn't been made better by technology. It doesn't mean it doesn't have its downside. It just simply means that the world in which we live is made better because of technology. And oddly, at least in the sector that I'm in and being at WGU, is like we've long held on to like, oh no, we got to have this in-person, place-based, et cetera, and that you're going to be given a textbook, even if you do have digital learning resources today, et cetera. But like here we sit in now the emerging age of AI, and we aren't even operating in a world that's fully embraced the internet yet. And if the internet, as I comment here, has democratized access, that's certainly been true at WGU, that we can reach and teach individuals wherever they are. and give them that personalized instruction, 24/7 tutoring. We can enable all the access to the learning resources that are necessary for them to do their self-directed learning and progress. But if what the internet did for democratizing access, AI is already enabled to democratize learning in a way that no amount of hiring could have ever done. There weren't enough experts, if you will, in all those fields to make sure that the individual got the personalized instruction that Benjamin Bloom highlighted 4 decades ago in his study that simply noted that in the conventional model, which is me standing in front of a lecture hall just delivering content, 20 to 40% of individuals would actually develop proficiency in a given subject. But if you add to that mastery instruction, which is, I'm now going to give you a feedback loop, and based upon how you're advancing in the subject, I'm now going to give you corrective instruction. But even further, if you added one-on-one tutoring, what he highlighted was that in that model, 90+% of individuals develop proficiency in any given subject. More importantly, the proficiency of that group was 2 standard deviations higher than those that are in the conventional instructional model. And oddly, we still hold on to this conventional instructional model like somehow it's really, really good. And AI is now sitting with us going like, oh man, if you ever thought about scaling personalized instruction with that mastery feedback loop, we're sitting on it. And so everything that we see in our future is absolutely going to be tech-enabled. Lastly, I'll just share is that we do envision a future where, in fact, the market is the accreditor. Because what really matters is whether the individual acquire the knowledge, skills, and ability that they need to be ready for the opportunities and the work that they're going to do in that world. This is true in a normal functioning economy, meaning economics behavior. It says that the consumer, in this case an employer, of talent needs to know that the value is going to be realized for, in fact, the talent that I hired. So doesn't that mean, in fact, the market is the validator of the quality versus traditional accreditation when looked at as a model and a process, et cetera, and said, oh no, the high-value ones are this. But tell me the last time when you interviewed, even come out of college, that the interviewer sat there and said, all right, tell me the 100 things that you learned specifically because of your degree. They don't. But when you possess a market-validated credential or a certificate, they go, oh, I already know that signals the proficiency you have. This is true in so many licensure fields today. You can't be a lawyer, a nurse, a doctor. You can't be a CPA if you don't pass that industry certification exam. We'll see that more and more. Closing slide, questions for you is that simply that you have to actually think of a talent economy that says you first and foremost focus on the individual. How do you make opportunity work for everyone? They then need to actually solve the employer side of this or the workforce side of this, which is they need to be ready with the skills to solve the specific skills gap that we see in the future, while also solving the high volume demand problem that still exists in a growing economy. They also are solving for equity, because if you have a skills-based architecture that's working for the individual, guess what? All that diversity of humanity is now able to more readily access all the opportunity in the world of work. And we get exactly what we always aspire to, which is talent, opportunities working for everyone, and everyone has an equal probability of participating in it. If both sides of those work, you actually then see the societal and the generational impact that we expect with opportunity. Thank you so much. We do, I think I was told by Taylor, we have a few moments if I went a little bit long to answer a question or two if you have them. If not, that's okay as well. So. Taylor told me, I see you waving me off, but Taylor told me in the back that if I went long, you could answer any questions if you have them. Okay. Oh, there is one.
So I know from working with you all firsthand that you have incredible teams of people doing great work to set up the competencies, the skills, and the learning opportunities that work to achieve what you've just outlined. What suggestion or guidance do you have for institutions that don't have the fabulous resources and teams that you have?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first thing I would say is that There's a theory of disruption or innovation that exists out there that we try to employ at WGU, and the theory simply is this, that you have to have dual track innovation. The dual track innovation is this, which is track one is really about continuing to innovate and evolve the things that you're already really good at. And there are many things that institutions are already really good at, but track two is different. Track two is, this is truly a highly disruptive, adjacent, or even transformative endeavor that you're undertaking. This is a full-time endeavor. You can't make it a part-time assignment of someone who already is working on a track one innovation. Such that implies the first thing you have to think about is, how do you even create a 5 to 10 member team that gets the funding that's necessary to say, hey, you have the responsibility of working on innovation without constraints. And the thing there, I would say, you have to do probably two things. One is, you have to have that team really focusing on designing the requirements or the features of that future thing that's a completely unconstrained thing. It's not at all constrained by your current operating model. The second, you do have to have the product and technology experts to say, this is likely going to be technology-enabled capabilities, that you have to have that technology expertise on that team so that you could translate a vision of a design, of a student journey, of a curriculum development, whatever it is, but ultimately, what is the technology that's needed there? So the best teams are going to have a blend of business and technology thinking there. Now, that still goes back to the first problem you asked, which is, can you get enough funding, which may be no more than a startup, meaning it's $500,000, $250,000, to just fund this 5 to 10 person team whose only job is to create the new thing. They have no obligations to deliver on their existing operating priorities. Too often where I see organizations fail is they take a full-time assignment and make it a part-time job of someone who already has a full-time job. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you for speaking today. We appreciate it greatly. Do you see the new administration doing anything really meaningful and significant to advance this work?
I certainly see a strong bias to two things I'd say would be encouraging. One is there seems to be, from a policy and legislative side, I do see advancements around workforce Pell. That it is for the first time saying that notion of Pell, which had a very higher ed-centric eligibility requirements, you had to be in this program at an accredited institution, et cetera, for this duration, adding more Pell dollars, meaning grant dollars to individuals who are now pursuing short-term upskilling and reskilling things, like that's a very good and a positive sign. The other thing I've certainly seen from both Burgess Owens, who was here yesterday, but also with Secretary McMahon and the administration itself, is that they do have the bias towards the digital records and how do you create the digital infrastructure that's necessary for all the employers and individuals to speak the same language. For those of you who don't know, a lot of where the LERs are even today, and Jason could tell you this from the Chamber, et cetera, that started with the Workforce Policy Advisory Board and Group that was facilitated originally by the Secretary of Commerce, Ivanka Trump, et cetera, in the first one. And thankfully, that spurred a lot of the work that's continuing to advance, and so I think we see that reemerging as that you may have more administrative kind of oomph behind that effort to facilitate the private sector advancements that are needed. So thank you for that question. One last one. I think we'll call it there. Yeah.
Okay, it does work, sorry.
Yeah.
So as we try to use AI tools and online learning, I'm all for that and see the functionality of it working, but how do we ensure students are learning those skills that they may not get if they're not working with other learners, like communication, collaboration, those types of things that we know are important in the workplace?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good, that speaks to the multimodal model. It's like you certainly, if you start with the specific skills or competencies that are necessary and you include things like that, interpersonal engagement, communication, both written and verbal, you know, that you have to ensure that you design then the learning modality or the methods to map to what the proficiencies that are needed, such that even if you see AI as an enabling tool, how do you create those environments utilizing that technology that will help develop those skills while also knowing that you have to have human-to-human interaction as part of your methods and modes? But I'll just give you an example how we use today augmented reality and AI to support develop an individual in our teacher licensure program, for example, that has to have a regular parent-teacher conference with a student who may have a particular circumstance, and next thing you know, you have the school administrator plus 2 parents and the child. We are today using augmented reality powered by AI that supports all the interactions of those different virtual individuals, so that our student can now be in a lower stakes environment and practicing all the dynamics that exist in communication. But rather than having human actors behind each one of those virtual individuals in that dynamic, they're all powered by AI. And so now you can actually have AI saying, hey, here's all the data and dynamics that we need of these 2 parents, here's the student's circumstance, here's the principal and administrator, and then there's you, the student. You're the only live person, if you will, in a VR headset-enabled environment and dynamic, that now is enabled by AI in a way that before we had actors behind all those virtual circumstances. And so these are just an example of how you can continue to say, hey, how could technology make this experience better, richer, more accessible, more affordable? Now, that may still not replace, oh no, I need a team-based project design. And so how do you design projects and project work as part of your skill development too? And what's the method and mode by which that happens? And then is there technology in a way to enable a multi-participant project model? That's particularly true at WGU, where all of our students are all over the place. How do you bring them into a project working environment when they cannot be physically co-located? Again, technology is a way to enable that. So I think that's the key point, which is if you don't start with the learning outcomes and you just start designing from the learning modalities, you'll get the wrong alignment. You need to ensure that what are the learning outcomes, and you work from that to designing what is the learning modalities and methods that you're going to use to do that. So, and then for all those designs, I just keep saying, well, how will technology make it better or even possible? So, all right. Thank you so much, everyone. It's great to be with you all.
It's been a while since I've been up here, so I just want to give a special thanks to everybody who's participated today, and a special thanks to Scott Pulse for taking time out of his busy schedule to come and share his thoughts and expertise and passion for this work with us today. And next time we're able to get Scott to come, I'll probably just ask him to do Q&A until the close of the event, because that was great. So before we close today and transition to Talent Forward, I wanted to take a moment to just talk a little about the next steps for the T3 Innovation Network, what we're doing, where we're headed, and where we're hoping to head with all of you as a collaborative entity. We went over this slide yesterday just talking about digital transformation. Just wanted to share this again just so that we're all centered around the next phase of work for the T3 Innovation Network is really about facilitating this digital transformation of the talent marketplace. It's really about supporting organizations, entities, coalitions in pursuing digital transformation and doing so in a meaningful way that aligns with a lot of the standards and focuses that T3 is committed to. When we think about digital transformation, there's a lot of different categories of technology, and Scott touched on a number of these. Last week, I was at the Transform HR Tech Conference talking to HR tech vendors and chief human resource officers about LERs. I didn't call them LERs to that audience. I called them skills-rich digital credentials to make it a little more approachable for the first time talking about this work intentionally with that audience. But we're trying to bring about this digital transformation across different categories of technology. So I'm not going to go through all the categories, but you can see that there's a lot of different categories of technology that require digital transformation each to facilitate end-to-end adoption and scale of LERs and for skills-based hiring and advancement. The work for the T3 Innovation Network, and many of you are involved in a lot of these projects and initiatives, and you've been great partners with us, and so thank you for doing that. But we're really focused on embedding skills in learning and hiring. And we're doing that through a number of different projects that T3 is overseeing or that we're kind of T3 adjacent to. So LERs, T3's been involved with LERs since the White House Commission a number of years ago, where the term was coined. We're deeply involved with folks like Sharon, who does lots of research analysis of digital wallets. There's a lot of digital wallet providers that we work closely with. And then we have 3 T3 initiatives or project areas that are really focused on getting skills and competencies and LERs into the hands of individuals, into the hands of the learner worker, so they can feel empowered with their skills and abilities to pursue their, whether it's an education objective or an employment objective, they can pursue those goals and do so in a meaningful way. So we have Experience U, where we partner with Education Design Lab to really kind of explore how can we leverage artificial intelligence to issue credentials to individuals based on their experiences. They can take unstructured data about their past experiences and achievements, whether those are in the workforce or in a learning environment, or even in a volunteerism environment. Take those experiences and generate a skills-based credential for them. Linked claims is one of our projects that actually came out of just a concept of how can we bind different claims together about skills and abilities, or bind different credentials together to create a unified claim about somebody's past achievements or past experiences. And that's evolved into creating a tool that allows individuals to go in, make an assertion about a skill and ability, link it to a learning and employment record if they would like to, and then seek an endorsement, attach evidence to that claim to add trust to that claim. So Tina, when you asked your question about how can we think about ways to add trust for some of these kind of soft skills that are hard to document from a learning experience, through tools like linked claims, we can have individuals be endorsed for their teamwork skills, their ability to collaborate. We can have employers issue credentials to individuals to recognize their ability to collaborate, their ability to lead, their ability to manage, that are sometimes harder to quantify from an academic setting. And then we have the LER-RS, which is one of our wonkier terms, but it stands for the LER Resume Standard. And that is where we're trying to find ways to enable resumes to ingest and consume LER data and make that LER resume presentation consumable by HRIS systems, but also consumable by the human, that you can link data from your wallet, digital wallet, and attach that to a resume presentation so that humans can see what kind of skills and abilities you have, but the machines behind it that are doing matching and mobility can also track that and match that and verify those skills. So there's a lot of work we're doing to try and embed skills in learning and hiring for individuals. And if you're not part of any of these projects and they sound intriguing to you, reach out. We're always welcome. We're always looking to add more members to our communities of practice around these efforts. Or we're looking for organizations or groups that want to pilot, field test, and explore how we can deploy these in real-world settings. So what's the next phase of T3? What are we doing in the next couple of years as we move into this next phase of we've developed some tools, we've prototyped some tools, and now we're going to try to deploy and release these tools. So we're moving towards pilots and enhancements around these tools. So whether that's linked claims, whether that's, we recently produced a job side, which is a tool that allows employers to create validated skill profiles for their demand jobs, and allows their training providers to create skills-based learning opportunities and then map to see how well aligned they are. We have linked claims, linked creds, we have a resume authoring tool, we have our LER resume standard work. So we're going to be piloting and enhancing these tools that we've developed. So if you're interested in piloting, or if you have enhancements that you'd like to see these tools include as a kind of part of the future roadmap for those products, let us know what those are so that we can work as a collaborative unit to make those happen. We're going to be working with some developers to build a T3 wallet based off the DCC wallet. We want to use that as a demonstration tool to show how these different tools that are being developed and deployed, not just T3 tools, but others, can be deployed in a wallet environment or be linked to from a wallet environment to add value so that people can start using things like wallet attached storage and other things to make wallets more approachable and make credentials more meaningful. We're really excited about this, but we're going to be developing a digital transformation planning tool. We're going to start using this for, Jamie, during the panel earlier today, talked about these digital transformation workshops. We're working with some of our TPM practitioners to help figure out what are the best ways for them to think about digital transformation. What are the things they need? What are the tools and resources they need? And we're going to take some of those learnings and create a digital transformation planning tool where people can put in some of their information about what they want to achieve, what are their goals and objectives, and we can guide them to the right tools and resources to help them on their digital transformation journey. If you have tools you'd like to be included in that, reach out. We're going to be building this tool. We're going to be using it to help link people towards different tools that are out there in the marketplace. So we want to create this together. So if you've got information, you've got tools or resources that should be included, don't hesitate to reach out to be part of that designing process. community is really important to the T3 Innovation Network. So we're going to be continuing to build our community, and part of that's through the C3 webinar series. That's been great to see lots of different practitioners across the skills-based ecosystem come and share what they're doing. If you have attended in the past, you know that these are a great way to learn about what different organizations are doing to approach skills in a meaningful way and skills-based hiring in a meaningful way. So if you would like to participate, reach out. We do these once a month. Our distribution list and our registration list continues to grow. We now have almost 900 individuals who have registered for this webinar series. We don't have 900 attend on a monthly basis, but they are part of that distribution list. So we send out updates and reminders about these events or recordings from these events. It's a great way to share your work with the community of the C3 webinar group. We also, as part of this community, we want to provide resources and access to tools, so we're going to continue to build out the T3 Hub. We're going to continue to use the T3 community blog. So if you're doing some great work that you'd like T3 to highlight, reach out. We're always looking for new ways to highlight that work, whether that's through the T3 community blog or you're producing resources, we can add it to the resource section of the Hub. We're going to be updating the LER toolkit within the Hub, so there are lots of different ways to include the great work you're doing into the T3 network hub and environment. So we want to make sure we're highlighting the great work you're doing, so make sure you can reach out. And then last but not least, we are going to be supporting end-to-end digital transformation pilots and projects. So we're hoping to work with a couple organizations. We're going to do 2 or 3 of these demonstrations over the next 2 years. We're not going to be funding these projects, but we're going to be providing a lot of technical support and advice and subject matter expertise to organizations, to entities and groups that are going to be doing their own demonstration and deployment of LERs for skills first strategies. And so if you're part of that and you'd like to see what we have to offer, reach out. If you want to be part of a bigger project for this demonstration, we have a lot of great consultants and a lot of great partners in the space that we'd love to provide access to help your teams be caught up to speed. So if you want to do LERs but your IT team needs some help, this is kind of we're trying to support that understanding, so that way they can understand what they need to do, what APIs exist, what open source code exists for them to deploy. So we're going to be providing a lot of support to the ecosystem over the next 2 years to facilitate greater adoption and scale of LERs. So that's the next phase of T3. We're really excited for what we're doing, but we have a few minutes left. If anybody has any questions or feedback or comments, or you want to share some of the work you're doing, we want to kind of wrap up the event before we do with just an opportunity for any of you to share thoughts or have any questions for T3, feel free to. If everybody's ready to get to lunch, that's also totally understandable. Yeah, we also welcome Jason, who is our fearless leader, to share his thoughts with us.
Thank you. I just wanted to make share a story from this morning. I was attending just across the river the Coleridge Initiative event. For those who are familiar with that, it's a collection of states that are engaging in secure data exchange, largely administrative and statistical data, to kind of combine different data sets held by state agencies to solve problems or to create new insights. And while I was there, I was posing some existential questions to the group about kind of where things are going given many of the funding cuts and rescissions. And one of the things I had challenged them to think about is, we've made copious investments in data infrastructure now for some time, really in furtherance of a paradigm that I would suggest is around evidence-based policy. And one of the things I was challenging them is, looking into the future, perhaps we need to unpack a new paradigm. And that paradigm is going to look very different. It's going to be broader than just evidence-based policy, but it's going to have to do different things with different stakeholders. And employers are going to have more buy-in into that, and their needs are going to need to be addressed. But most importantly, learners and workers themselves. And folks were bringing up initiatives like JetX, which is more of a public-private approach for how we kind of source data from employers, as well as the work supported by the T3 Innovation Network and its many partners. So we had, yesterday we heard from Robert Magoo and Mike Rogers from the state of Arkansas, and they were in attendance. Robert was actually on a panel with me, but Mike was there front row, and they were referencing their launch program, which Mike's talked about yesterday. And as part of that, I was pointing out, that's what the new paradigm is going to look like. We're collecting this data to really empower employers, learners, and workers with better information to take action around labor market mobility and just upward mobility in today's economy. So why I'm sharing that is I think, the folks that have been, putting in the blood, sweat, and tears to advance movements like this and to engage cross-domain. It was interesting, I asked in the room, knowing the answer already, I said, how many folks in this room, very large conference room, represent the business community? Not one hand went up. They're not even at the table. And they weren't designed to be at the table. What I suggested is maybe in a year or two, a lot more hands are going to go up because we do need a more public-private data infrastructure that addresses a larger value proposition that reaches more stakeholders. So all that to say, the work you all are doing and have been doing, I think is creating the new paradigm, and a lot of other folks are taking notice. And in this kind of existential moment for a lot of the kind of current and past data infrastructure, they're looking to groups like T3 and this digital transformation effort to see what the future might look like. So I just wanted to say thank you to all of you who have been doing it, who've been kind of thinking outside the box. And I think we're really moving towards something special. And folks are looking to stakeholders like you all for leadership. So just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Jason. Are there any questions or anything that anybody wanted to add before we move towards the close? All right, great. We will have, before we transition to the invitation to Talent Forward and transition to lunch, I just want to take a moment to say that, I've gotten a lot of feedback from everybody. This has been a great event, that the space is beautiful and that everything's been running smoothly, but I did not have a hand in any of that. So I just wanted to just ask you all to just give a round of applause to our events team, our AV team, and our facilities teams for making this event special. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Jamie Francis, to help transition us over to Talent Forward. Thank you, everybody.
So I believe that my job as cheerleader in residence is to get you all really excited for the transition to Talent Forward. So I'm just going to go ahead and cue you now that at some point during these very brief remarks, I'm going to ask you for a drum roll. And if you could please just humor me and do it when that time comes, I would greatly appreciate it. But for those of you who are registered, we are so excited for you to join our Talent Forward event that transitions directly after this event. I had the great pleasure of sitting in on a couple of the speaker prep calls. And if you would like to be inspired by the employer community truly taking some game-changing steps in workforce, then this is the event for you. We can absolutely guarantee a really engaging kickoff panel, including Scott, who you just heard from, but some other phenomenal speakers as well, testimonials from employers that have done some truly incredible work within their organizations and are serving as pillars and examples of what success can look like if we do things a little bit differently, as well as spotlights of countless local partners all across the country, including chambers of commerce, education and training providers, as well as nonprofits. So we're really excited for you all to participate in those conversations. If you are registered, would encourage you to take a look at your email that you should have received yesterday that has a QR code that will allow you to download the app so that you can have access to the full agenda. If you have not yet registered for the event and we have inspired you to continue in joining in on the conversation, then we have a QR code back at the front desk at the chamber. So just head out towards the lobby. You can track down that QR code, and that will allow for you to register for the event and to stick around. And we highly encourage you to do so. But we would definitely love for you to stay for lunch. My colleagues are going to be opening up the doors to our brand new briefing center. You all are amongst the first to see this new beautiful space unveiled. And I think you can agree with us at this point in time that we do food really well here at the chamber. So we've got a delicious lunch prepared for you, and we'll hope that you'll stay and network with your colleagues. So as soon as we close this out, please make sure to transition to the briefing Center. You're welcome to keep your things at the table if you're planning to stick around, but just make way. We'll be adding a couple of tables to the back of the room for our growing community of practice of innovators in the workforce space. So I know that he has already thrown out a couple of shout outs, but if you would please join me in a very hearty round of applause for our colleague Taylor Hansen. I know that everyone in this room will agree with me that he is not just an exceptional leader for the work that he does, but how he approaches the work and has really built a sense of community of practice amongst this group of tech educators and vendors and partners. So we're really excited for his continued leadership with the U.S. Chamber Foundation and grateful for him to have put on such a great event that hopefully you all had a great time with. So here's the cue. And now, drum roll, please. Thank you. Please join us for the game-changing Talent Forward event. Thank you all so much for your time, and we look forward to seeing you later this afternoon.